noses aren't going to be pushed around anymore because we drive front-wheel drive Dodge Aries K.
Back in 1981, fresh off a life-saving and very controversial government bailout, Chrysler's new president, Lee Iacocca, was the public face behind a pair of mid-sized family cars on their new K-Car platform. The first K-Cars, the Dodge Aries and Plymouth Reliant, were themselves derived from the compact Omni and Horizon models and replaced the larger and trouble-prone Dodge Aspen and Plymouth Volare. By 1983, more new K-Car variants arrived that expanded into luxury cars, sports cars, and minivans, and sold so well that Chrysler was able to repay their government loan 7 years early. This is the story of the Dodge Aries and Plymouth Reliant. This is My Old Car.
The brightest star in the new Chrysler Corporation, K-Car.
If there is any car that fully personifies the extreme boxy automotive styling of the 1980s, the original K-Cars would likely be on the top of most anyone's list. Yet what many may not realize is that the K-Car platform owes its existence to a much smaller and less successful car platform.
For the country.
Chrysler had strongly depended on large rear-wheel drive cars in the early 1970s. As sales of their large cars fell, inventory piled up, as Chrysler differed from GM, Ford, and AMC, who produced cars based on dealer orders.
They would build more cars than they had orders for. In fact, it was not uncommon for them to have something like 100, 150,000 cars sitting somewhere in Detroit.
In desperate need for smaller cars, Chrysler rushed out the Dodge Aspen and Plymouth Volare in 1976.
Sold his vet and he's picking up his new car.
Oh yeah? What do you get? Turbo Z? Trans Am?
Volare.
Which, although were improvements over the 1960s era Dodge Dart and Plymouth Valiant they replaced, their truncated development time resulted in the Aspen Volare twins to be one of the most recalled models, not just in Chrysler's history, but in U.S. automotive history.
Hi guys.
The release of the Dodge Omni and Plymouth Horizon in 1978 was a modified Chrysler of Europe Simca Horizon and was their first front-wheel drive subcompact with a transverse four-cylinder engine. This followed Chrysler's first attempt to petition the U.S. federal government for a loan in 1977. Led by then-company president John Ricardo, his request was denied by President Jimmy Carter unless new management was brought in. After being fired from Ford in 1978, Lee Iacocca was hired to replace Ricardo just 3 months later. Although the Omni and Horizon sales had been disappointing, they still showed that Chrysler had made a good effort at moving away from their gas-guzzling large car past, and that this same small car platform could be adapted to a new midsize line as well. This midsize line, which would become the first K-Cars, probably would have reached production sooner had it not been for Chrysler's dire financial condition.
The next generation of fuel-efficient front-wheel drive family-size cars.
Seeing the good effort with the Omni and Horizon, and the detailed plan for the K-Car line, Congress approved a loan for Chrysler
For, I think, $1.5 billion.
At the time, there were many in the auto industry, as well as business as a whole, who believed that such a bailout set a horrible precedent, and that bankruptcy would give the other three U.S. automakers, including the also struggling American Motors, a chance to step in and fill the gap. However, the U.S. government had an incentive to bail out Chrysler specifically, since in 1977, Chrysler was awarded the contract to build the M1 Abrams tank. As the U.S. was still in the pre-Reagan years of the Cold War, having Chrysler go under was a considerable risk to national security. But they also had to consider not just the number of Chrysler jobs that would be lost, but it would have caused a ripple effect among suppliers, dealers, and the cities and towns that supported them. Not that job losses were avoided thanks to the bailout.
Iacocca had taken the workforce from 40,000 in 1979 to about 22,000 in 1983.
Upon its release in late 1980 for the 1981 model year, Chrysler emphasized the K in the name of the first two K-Car models. They were advertised as the Dodge Aries K and the Plymouth Reliant K. Although Chrysler was no stranger to badge engineering prior to the K-Car introduction, the Aries and Reliant began a trend that Ford and GM would do as well, which was to offer the same car across multiple divisions, with nothing of any value to encourage a customer to buy one brand over the other. With advertising budgets at a minimum, early print ads for both the Aries and Reliant were rumored to use the same car, with just the badging swapped. Although not typical today, it was typical in the 80s to offer multiple body styles within the same model line, and the same was true here, with 2- and 4-door sedans and a 4-door wagon. All three shared the same overall dimensions, including wheelbase. These matching sizes meant that the 2-door would sometimes be referred to as a 2-door sedan, not a coupe. The 2 and 4 doors offered a base model that stickered below $6,000, which brought in a lot of potential buyers, but initial sales were hurt by Chrysler's decision to build more of the mid-level custom and top-end SE trims.
Of all the cars in America, these are probably the most perfect family cars, the 83 Dodge Aries K.
Fuel economy mandates meant that the new K-Cars wouldn't exactly be fast, and would likely be considered dangerously slow on our roads today. The base engine was a front-wheel drive, transverse-mounted, carbureted four-cylinder that made just 82 horsepower. Manual transmissions were available, but rare, as the base models came standard with a front bench seat and a 3-speed column-mounted automatic transmission. A slightly more powerful 2.6-liter four-cylinder was an option, but it was built by Mitsubishi, so it wasn't broadcast in the very red, white, and blue themed ads, as Chrysler really wanted to push how much better their American-built cars were compared to Japanese imports. However, since the Mitsubishi engine had hemispherical-shaped combustion chambers, it technically could be called a Hemi, and as such, it was actually badged as a Hemi. In an unexpected twist that worked in Chrysler's favor in terms of optics of selling an all-American-made car, the Mitsubishi's engine's poor reliability would lead to its replacement with a Chrysler-designed 2.5-liter 4 by 1986.
America's not going to be pushed around anymore. At your Dodge Ram dealer, the American way to beat the pump.
In 1981, the K-Car platform was only for the Aries and Reliant. However, by 1982, an upscale version of the Aries was introduced as the Dodge 400 and was shared with the new Chrysler LeBaron. Both cars were available as convertibles, which had been missing as a factory option among all the major automakers since the mid-70s.
This dazzling convertible that puts a little fun back into driving. No cars are perfect, but these come pretty close.
What the hell are you driving here?
Plymouth would get their own version called the Caravelle in 1983, but initially was only sold in Canada. The 400 would evolve into the 600 just 2 years later. Sales of the 400 were a small fraction of the original K-cars, as the 400 only managed 31,000 sales in its first year, compared to over 155,000 for the Aries and 151,000 for the nearly identical Reliant. 1981 would end up being the highest sales year for both models, despite the cost-cutting used in their design, the most notable being the rear windows on the four-door sedan and wagon models. For the 1981 and 82 models, the windows in the back doors could not be rolled down, and instead you could only pop open the glass in the small rear quarter window. The four-door sedan was by far the most popular model, with more four-door sales each year than the two-door and wagon sales combined. A refresh was done in 1985, with new headlamps, tail lamps, and grille. Yet this refresh may have been unnecessary in terms of sales, as they remained steady with over 100,000 sold each year up through 1984, and 1985 sales actually dropped slightly from the previous year. Despite the trim designations being the same between Aries and Reliant, the Reliant would become the more popular, selling around 150,000 more than the Aries over the course of the entire model run. Carburetors gave way to fuel injection in 1986, as did a new 2.4-liter Chrysler-built four-cylinder that replaced the Mitsubishi 2.6-liter. Sales, however, dropped slightly, with 1986 being the first year the Aries didn't top 100,000 units sold. This led to the trim levels changing to just base and LE trims.
We made the best better. 550 Reliant, the Super K. Match it if you can.
Some of the sales drop starting in 1986 may have been attributed to the new Dodge Shadow and Plymouth Sundance compacts, which went on sale in late 1986 for the 1987 model year.
Unleashing a superbly equipped new breed of compact car, Dodge Shadow.
Although they were designated as compacts, they weren't much smaller than the mid-size Aries and Reliant, and looked a bit more modern, as the corners were a bit more rounded off, especially when compared to the original K-car design.
Plymouth Sundance, the pride's inside before you're inside.
By 1988, both the Aries and Reliant had the name America or Canada tacked on the end, depending on where they were sold.
What wonderful values!
And that was the sole trim option available. It was equivalent to the former LE trim, so features that were once optional were now standard, which gave it a nice bump in sales for its final full model year.
Yes, America can compete, and Chrysler's building the cars that prove it.
1989 would be the final model year, but with no wagons produced, and production ended in December of '88. So only about half as many 89 models were sold than in previous model years. As the remaining Aries and Reliant models were sold in 1989, their replacements hit showrooms in late 1988, the Dodge Spirit and Plymouth Acclaim. Same as before, the two models really had no difference other than the front and rear ends, and were similar to the Shadow Sundance twins, in that the corners were rounded off more, but otherwise still had a very conservative look. The Spirit would later introduce a sportier RT model that had no Plymouth equivalent, as the 90s represented the first decade where Chrysler would start pushing Dodge to be their performance division. The Spirit and Acclaim were officially defined as the AA body, but it was still derived from the original K platform, as was nearly every other car Chrysler offered during the 1980s and into the early 90s, as you can see from this extensive list of cars that have the original K cars, the Aries and Reliant, to thank for their very existence. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel.
We're not going to fall for a banana in the tailpipe.
You're not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe?
If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, Leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
Look, man, I ain't falling for no banana in my tailpipe. See, that's my natural fuzz. You've been hanging out with this dude too long. I'm sorry, I'm just fucking with you. That's funny to me. Sorry.